Okay, everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. And thank you for allowing me the time to sit with you here today in this gusty weather with the threat of rain. I just ask what happens if it starts raining. Apparently there's no plan B. So I don't know, I don't run for it or something. Anyway, it's a pleasure being with you here today, and may I start by saying how much I admire each and every one of you and everyone here who have given up their time, their comfort. I'm presuming that your digs are more comfortable than this. If they're not, I do apologize. But for the sake of something which is incredibly important. And this today is my third stop. I passed by Cambridge, Norfolk, and then I came over to Birmingham, because wherever I go, there is something happening. The kind of movement that we're seeing across the country, throughout all sectors of society, including yours, students, youth, is unprecedented, is absolutely remarkable. And it's something to behold. I've been an activist now for almost 40 years, since I was about 15 years old. And I can truly say that I've never seen anything like the current movement. I was one of the leaders of the 2 million march in February 2003, which still is, by the way, the biggest demonstration in UK's history. Whoops. That camera is not going to stand. And even then, when the streets of not only the UK, but the streets of the world were absolutely simmering with anger and with intent to stop the prospect of war in Iraq, it doesn't come close to what we're seeing now. In a few days' time, next week, we'd have finished 8 months. 8 months of one of the most barbaric episodes of human history. And, you know, some of you might read history or have studied history or read about history in their spare time. You know, we talk about certain chapters where human beings did some atrocious things, some really horrific things. And, you know, we read and we seldom think that that is something that could possibly happen in our lifetime, something that we can actually witness ourselves. Yet, if there is any lesson to be learned from history, it is that human capacity for evil in pursuance of interests that are devoid of any morality is something that happens time and time and time again. You know, the last time that a genocide occurred was just before the Second World War, where Europe persecuted its Jews, and the Holocaust happened. And the slogan that emerged, or the lesson that emerged, and the line that was repeated time and again that emerged as a result was that never again. But yet, only a few years down the line, it's happened again. And it's happened again and again. And now it's happening again. And this is the one lesson that history never fails in. The fact that humanity, unfortunately, despite the fact that the overwhelming population of the world, in my view, and I believe in most of our view, is good, is sound, is moral, is ethical, wants peace, wants prosperity, wants development, wants good things for people. But it just takes a clutch of bad elements, of bad actors, of those who believe that they have the right because they have the means to destruct, to demolish, to sully, to pollute. And unfortunately, this is something that now we have been seeing happen day in, day out for the past almost 8 months. And at what cost? At the cost of around 50,000 killed, at least, because we're still to uncover those whose bodies haven't been recovered. And many, many of those have already been concreted over. Because, you know, they can. They can. And because, you know, we needed that pier to be built so that we could get aid in, that excuse. So it's okay to concrete over rubble underneath which thousands lie, thousands of men, women, children, elderly lie. Over 100,000 wounded, easy. An entire nation obliterated. 1.5 million people stand to suffer famine and starvation. And the world watching. I mean, in reality, that is probably the most devastating chapter in all of this story. I mean, obviously, when we talk about people killed, slaughtered for doing nothing whatsoever, about hospitals bombarded in the way that we saw, schools, shelters, playgrounds, playing fields, being absolutely obliterated for no reason whatsoever. And I mean for no reason whatsoever, regardless of what excuses might be thrown here or there. You'd think that there can be nothing worse. But in actual fact, what is worse is that when those who can act fail to act, deliberately stop short of acting, those who can stop this genocide stand by, watch, and say nothing, allowing the genocide to continue. Even worse, justify, explain, and sometimes even encourage the genocide to happen. I don't know whether you saw the infamous image of the former UN representative to the United Nations, the American representative at the United Nations, Nikki Haley, who, by the way, was about to become the Republican nominee for the presidential race in November, so about probably to become the president of the US, and now touted as being the most favorable vice president if Trump was to win, and it looks like he will win. And the fact that she was standing in front of missiles designed to obliterate, designed to kill, designed to shred the bodies of children to bits. And she signs it with her name, and she says, "Finish them. Finish them." You see, when I was growing up, there was this narrative, and this narrative is embedded in Western, particularly Eurocentric, political and ideological thought from a long, long time ago. But it became more tempered over the past 40, 50 years because it became a little bit impolite. And that element was to assume that the white man had the right, had the duty to master and to enslave the world. When you read Rudyard Kipling's White Man's Burden, White man's burden. Basically, the idea here from one of the greatest novelists and men of letters in Western history, writing about how the white man, the white person, who has attained the very best, has achieved the highest of successes and achievements, has been created in this glorious form. That man has a burden now, has a responsibility. And that is to educate, to teach the others, the coloreds, the blacks, the browns. White man's burden. That line was used as a justification in order to go around the world pillaging, enslaving, robbing other nations and people's riches, and creating havoc around the world. That was then. But more recently, that became a little bit more, well, framed in a more acceptable, palatable manner. It hasn't changed, by the way. It hasn't changed. It's just now presented in a better format. So rather than saying, well, we have the right to go and educate those backwards, those savages, as was often said and written and documented, it's now framed in different formats that take a political guise or a strategic guise or about national interests or about stability and peace and the such. But the fact is that the end game is the same. The justification that this line of thought, that the master nations that we here in the UK, the Western nations of Europe, America and Canada, have the right and often the obligation to absolutely obliterate these people who disagree with the fact that we are masters and we are here to stay. Anyone who merely disagrees, who merely dissents or opposes or objects, is dealt with in the way that the Palestinians have been dealt with. What have the Palestinians done to deserve this? What have the Palestinians done for this crime against them to be justified? What crime has the father who has lost every single member of his family, what has he done to deserve this? What's the crime of the child that is now left with no one? No siblings, no parents, no grandparents, not a home, nothing. Just wandering around, just walking where, going where the others are going, aimlessly. What has that child done? Why? And why is it that the likes of Nikki Haley think that she has the right to openly sign that missile, hoping, wishing, praying that it would obliterate even that child who is now on his or her own? Why? What is the kind of mentality that governs these kinds of people? My dear friends, this movement of yours is one that will be written down. And listen, this is no exaggeration. I'm not here for pleasantries. I'm describing to you what I have seen and I have experienced and I have witnessed. The most difficult stand is the stand for truth when power is the opposite side, when those who have weapons are on the other side, those who have political authority and government are on the other side, when those who have wealth are on the other side. That is the most difficult stand. That is the hardest stand to take. To stand next to an oppressed person in the face of a great and mighty oppressor. That is a difficult stand. Till this day, my claim to fame, in all honesty, is that I stood and demonstrated as a teenager for the liberation of South Africa. I've done a lot since then, but to be perfectly honest, that is the stand I take with more pride than anything else. Because at that time, and I was doing my O-levels and A-levels in Manchester at the time. At that time, our then government, led by Margaret Thatcher, whom I'm sure you know, you've heard of, decided that the South Africans, the blacks, were terrorists. She and her government decided that Nelson Mandela, who was languishing in jail at that time, was a terrorist. They decided that our demand for BDS was an illegitimate one and was an immoral one. And there were so many government officials coming out explaining to us how, no, you see, when you call for BDS, you're going to harm the black South African farmers. You're going to harm the businesses that employ the young black men and women. So you're targeting the wrong. But ultimately speaking, it was that BDS that freed South Africa. And you only have to read the memoirs of the likes of Nelson Mandela, the likes of Desmond Tutu, and the other fighters against apartheid. And they write down there that the student movements in the UK that demanded the boycott of South Africa, that deemed whoever holidayed in South Africa, in apartheid South Africa, to be a racist and to be someone who was aiding and abetting the apartheid regime, it was they and them that ultimately caused the collapse of apartheid. At the time, the apartheid system was supported by all the powerful governments in the world, including ours. It was supported by the United States. But it was the student movement that brought it down. And you here today, your stand here, is sending shivers down the spines of those in authority, those in high offices, those in charge. And it's sending such a message of hope to those in Gaza who look around and see only rubble, and see only the rubble of human consciousness, the decay of humanity that has caused the devastation that we see on our screens every single day. And what this movement has revealed to the entire world is that we don't only stand for Gaza. Gaza is the trigger, is the reason why we have decided to leave our homes, to leave our studies, our classrooms and the such, and to come and take this stand. But now, our fellow students around the world, particularly in the United States and in Canada and Australia, everywhere around the world, they are now calling for a redress of the systems that govern our nations. Not only to redress the foreign policy on Palestine and Israel, but to go beyond that. Because we've discovered that this system that tells us that we have it better than anyone else in the world is lying to us. We are now discovering that the claim that we are free whilst others are enslaved, that is a lie. Ask any professor who has stood up in their campus and denounced the genocide. ultimately to be sacked, ask them how free they are. The claim that we respect, no, hold sacred the freedom of thought and freedom of expression, that is a lie. Ask anyone who has stood up and tweeted or posted or spoken against the Zionist genocide machine in support of Palestinian children and innocent civilians, and see the kind of ton of bricks that have fallen upon them and their careers and their future prospects and their reputations, and then tell me how free and how respectful we are of freedom of thought and freedom of expression. I'll go further. The way we saw the National Guard and security and police officers in America handle, in fact, malhandle women protesters, professors and students, whilst calling for the liberation of women in Afghanistan and Iraq, where they waged war and killed millions of innocent people over there, claiming that it was for the sake to liberate women. We have now discovered that that was a lie, and it continues to be a lie. My brothers and sisters, the systems under which we live are a facade that looks glitzy, shiny. It looks impressive. It looks beautiful. But it's a CGI. It's just fake. Because behind it is a machine that allows the genocide that has happened against the Palestinians. Behind it is a war machine that sells to the Israelis the weapons with which the bodies of Palestinians are shred to bits. Behind it are the corporations who fund to the hilt the killers, the murderers, the genociders, and protect them. Behind that facade is the reality of the system under which we exist, and which tells us that we are the best, that we are free, that we have the right to do as we will. It turns out that the international community, including the human rights charters, including the international courts of justice or the International Criminal Court, all that, which is incredibly impressive when you look at it, when you read about it. Oh my word, how respectful of the law are we? The Charter for Human Rights, for instance, and the Declaration of the United Nations. You read about this and you think, wow, wow. But then as soon as the ICJ starts to speak and says something which is to the detriment of those standing behind that facade, immediately, well, we're not sure about the neutrality of the ICJ. As soon as the International Criminal Court issues arrest warrants against the criminals, Netanyahu and his generals, immediately we are told about how officials, high and mighty, suited up, try to blackmail the ICC, telling them, hang on, we didn't set this up so that you can persecute us. We set this up so that you can go after the Africans and the Asians and the others, not us. This wasn't meant as a tool of justice for everyone, equally. If that's what you and I thought, then we were fooled. These tools which give this impression of grandeur, of greatness, of justice, of humanity, these are tools to be used by those who have the might and power of authority and wealth and armor in order to do as they wish. And therefore our movement today, my dear brothers and sisters, is a movement, yes, to stand by our brothers and sisters in Palestine and in Gaza, but it's also a stand in order to bring that system to account. The system under which we exist, and whoever is behind that system, we need to bring them to account. When anyone speaks about democracy, we need to ask them, do you really mean democracy for all? When people speak about freedom and use it as a gimmick for their election campaigns, we need to bring them to task and say, do you mean freedom for all? When we talk about peace, are we talking about a peace achieved under the boot of an oppressor and in front of the barrel gun of someone who thinks that they have the right to subdue and subjugate? Or are we talking about the peace that you and I believe in? A peace that is just, a peace that is ongoing and sustainable. We need to start asking real questions. And by the way, that same system, which I've said, I've lectured for years talking about how fantastic this international community is, how incredibly impressive it all looks. But you see, the fact of the matter is that without a value system that really drives it, that is really behind it, it sort of falls apart and shatters quite quickly. We, my dear brothers and sisters, we need to understand that whilst we are told that we live in one of the greatest countries, the G7, my word, the G. What does G stand for? Great? What? Grand? What? The G7, we're part of the G20. Yet, the government itself tells us that we have more than 3 million people in this country that hover around the poverty line. We are told by the government, and according to its own statistics, we have 1 million children. If they don't go to school, they do not eat. We are told by the government that we have around 2 million pensioners who every winter have to choose either to stay warm or to eat. That is no G in my books. The fact that the biggest booming business that we have today is food banks. Every other week, there's a new food bank opened on the high streets. My local MP had the audacity and the naivety and I would say stupidity to once send around a flyer emblazoned with his picture cutting the ribbon of the new food bank in his constituency, as though that is somehow some source of pride and for which he ought to be applauded and he ought to be congratulated and he ought to be returned to Parliament for the next 5 years. Why on earth do we have food banks? Why? Why on earth do we have children who do not enjoy a nutritious meal, not even once a week? Why? Why is the NHS so crumbling and falling and failing despite the immense, incredible, superhuman efforts of its staff and members? Why is it that we have such poor roads and transport systems? Why is it that we're suffering this cost of living crisis? Why? Why? So this system is not only allowing for our country and the Western countries generally to behave in such a devilish manner when it comes to Palestine, for example, because there's a long list of where we behave absolutely ridiculously, but it's failing us here at home. This system isn't working. This system isn't working, and therefore And one of the things I'm doing, I'm going around telling people about the importance of the next general election. And it's not about changing parties. It's not about changing rosettes from blue to red or to yellow or to green. That's not the change we seek. It's not the change of personnel. So another guy suited up sits in 10 Downing Street. That's not change. The change is in the entire system. The entire system. It doesn't make sense that in America, where the preparation and the campaigning for the presidential elections in November started around a year ago and will continue to run, plowing billions of dollars into advertising campaigns and into special reports and publications, websites, and all of this, so that ultimately you end up with two candidates, one bad, one worse. And then the American people are told, this is democracy. That's not democracy. That's not democracy. To end up with either Biden or Trump, I'm sorry, but that is a circus I do not wish to attend ever in my entire life. And people need to stop being taken for mugs, for mere customers who pay in order to fund this spectacle. We need real change. My dear brothers and sisters, your stand, once again, your stand is noble. Your stand is honorable. Your stand is important, and your stand is effective. Otherwise, why would the media, why would some elements within the university, why would the government be against you? Why would they try to tarnish these encampments up and down the country? Why? If they didn't mean anything, if they had no impact, why would they care? Why do governments wish to ban and outlaw BDS if it wasn't effective? I'm constantly asked, well, what's going to happen? You know, am I going to change the world if I don't buy a can of Coke? The answer is yes, it will. And that's why they want to ban you from thinking that way, from acting that way. The fact that we have over 28 states in America who have officially banned BDS, where if you're to be recruited by a university, you have to sign a document that says you do not believe and you will not be part of any campaign that relates to BDS. Why is that so important? Why does the American Congress, the British Parliament, and several parliaments across the world need to sit down and discuss for hours, days, and weeks banning BDS when it's not important? It is extremely important because it is extremely efficient and it works. And we know I was one day part of that campaign and I saw the outcome. I saw the collapse of apartheid. We need now to bring down another idol. We need to bring down another pariah. We need to bring down now another enemy of humanity. And that is the system that governs the world. The system that allowed for the occupation of Palestine for so long. The system that allowed for the apartheid regime in Tel Aviv to create such destruction and devastation whilst the world watches and cares not a single jot. Thank you very much for having me. I wish you all well. I wish you better weather than this. Jazakum Allah khair walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Anas. Inshallah, we'll be doing, I guess, a Q&A. If anyone here has any question they want to ask Dr. Anas and his wealth of knowledge. So inshallah, I'll give it to the audience. If anyone is too shy to ask any questions out directly, please message either Sahar or Saf, and it'll get to me inshallah.
Sure, brilliant. I just wanted to ask you about, like, I don't really know too much about like, the academic boycott of South Africa, because I think that's really important presently now that there is an academic boycott of Israeli universities because they are an apparatus of the state and are actively complicit and in fact are direct participants to carry out the genocide that's currently happening. Can you tell us a little bit about like if there was like, an academic boycott in South Africa?
You're absolutely right. I mean, that element of the BDS we seldom pay attention to, but it's probably one of the most effective and potent elements of BDS, and that is the academic sanctions, the academic boycott. You see, I mean, when you look at Israel, this wasn't as important when it came to South Africa, although there was that. I mean, there would be, for instance, South African professors who would usually come to the UK to deliver speeches. They were boycotted and stopped. And that became a problem for many South African professors at the time who wanted that international accreditation. But it wasn't as large simply because South Africa wasn't that renowned for its academic stature around the world. However, what we have today is Israel is the global capital of high tech, of nanotechnology, of espionage, of security systems and the such. If you know that baton that security officers at the airport they wave in front of you to detect any kind of metal or the such, that's normally manufactured, or the technology is based in Israel. So Israel is basically the hub of world technology and is going to grow within that particular sector. Imagine if we refused to entertain any kind of deal, any kind of agreement, any kind of arrangement that would allow that to develop and flourish, that would allow that to happen. If we held our universities responsible for the deals they strike with Israeli counterparts, and to say, by the way, to say that, well, we're talking about academia, knowledge, and students and the such. This has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with politics. Don't buy into the lies they tell us. They tell us about, well, sports has nothing to do with politics. Sports has everything to do with politics. Music, Eurovision, has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with politics. And we must understand that if we regard Israel to be the pariah state that I am today claiming that it is, the evil, terrorist, genocidal, murderous state, apartheid state that I absolutely believe that it is, then we must have no dealing whatsoever. Whatsoever. No holidays, no academic dealings, no exchanges, no nothing. Absolutely not. Every single one of our universities and academic centers and institutions who have any dealings whatsoever with any Israeli counterpart is complicit in the crime that has been committed in Gaza. There can be no question. And people need to justify. The thing is, you see, when I say these things, either on the media or on panels or the such, I'm often taken to task and told to prove my point. When it's the opposite that should happen. Those who have these dealings must justify that what they're doing is correct, is morally right, is humanely acceptable. Because it's not. We must start seeing Israel for what it is. And we must start describing Israel for what it is. And by the way, and this is incredibly important, this movement that has now been going on for almost 8 months, the last national demonstration was number 15. The biggest of which was a 1,000,000-man march, and the smallest was about 250,000. And every single day there were events up and down the country. This movement would never have been possible without our Jewish brothers and sisters who stand squarely against the crimes committed by Israel. This is not about Jews. The Jews in this country and across the world are amongst the most important element, the makeup for the pro-Palestinian movement. Especially the Holocaust survivors, those in their 80s and 90s, those whose parents were killed in Auschwitz and other concentration camps in the mid-20th century in Central Europe. Those who stand holding placards and banners with the Palestinian flag, with images of Palestinian children, condemning Israel, those are at the forefront of our movement. And that's something that we must always remember. We must always absolutely remember. So academic boycott is something which is essential to what we're doing. And by the way, I mean, when we're talking about academia, I would absolutely, I mean, the array of brilliant Jewish professors and intellectuals whom all of a sudden we have realized live amongst us and write and publish and speak and the such, and have been so brilliant from the very start of this war. You know, from Ilan Pappé to Avi Shleim to Miko Pella to Gideon Levy to, and the list grows. Those are the kind of academics. And by the way, they are calling us, they are telling us that we ought to engage in an academic boycott and sanctions of Israeli academic institutions. It is they who are pushing for this, and they are calling for this. Yes. Alaikum assalam.
I'm here because I'm the mother of a student at the University of Qatar.
It's a pleasure.
You can probably tell I'm not one of the students, but when I was younger, we marched and we boycotted against apartheid. We then saw the genocide in Rwanda. We then saw the genocide in Bosnia, which was a really painful
Yes.
time. But it activated us at your age. We were your age when we saw that, and we just couldn't tolerate the injustice. And the veils came down as to the hypocrisy of speaking about freedom and democracy when you can watch a genocide on European soil. And now we have this genocide, and there have been others in between. How do you feel we are organised as a British Muslim community now in comparison to the past? I mean, this is amazing to see. Do you think we've learned and developed, or do you think we're back at that point again, watching a genocide unfold?
Things aren't the same. They've moved on. And the best thing, in my view, the best thing about the current movement is the diversity. And I think that the fact that the Muslim community whom you ask about, the Muslim community has realized that it can't stand alone. It can't be isolated. It can't stand away from its, you know, its extension, its natural extension. The people of this country, we won't be able to make any kind of real change. The most dangerous bit about our movement, and this is what shakes the government to the core, it frightens it like nothing else. And by the way, I'm not just guessing, I know, because people from within government, they tell me how scared government departments are, and the biggest thing that scares them is the fact that, you know, why are the Christians with them? Why are the Jews with them? Why are the atheists with them? Why are the Sikhs, the Hindus, why are they also part of this? That is what scares them the most. I personally believe that for any change to happen, every section of British society needs to mobilize. Every part of Britain needs to be part of this, because the things that I talked about the system under which we exist, the people who are poor, the majority of them aren't Muslims. They will need to take the horn by the head, the bull by the horns, and change this and say we will not have it ever again. And when they do, we must be there with them to stand by them and say, we're with you. We're with you, because this is a case for justice. I believe that things have moved on. Probably not to the extent that I wish or I had hoped, but they have moved on and they have developed. And probably the best thing about the Muslim community when I look around and I come to places like this is that we have a younger generation who aren't hung up on the issues that my generation or the generation before me were. They're thinking in new ways. They're communicating, connecting in new ways. They have new means of reaching to the core of news that I personally wouldn't know how to get to. So they're free from many, many shackles that tied down my generation or the generation before me. And the thing about them is that today, the young, Muslims and otherwise, they see themselves as global citizens, citizens of the world, where if something was to happen in Gaza, if it was to happen in Kashmir, if it was to happen in Latin America, that it's something that affects them, impacts them. In my time, people who are very close to me used to ask me, how far away is South Africa? South Africa is like the other end of the world. Why on earth do you care about what's happening in South Africa? And I needed to explain to them that this was important. And they would say, well, so what if apartheid collapsed? What would that change? But now, whoever sits in Birmingham or in Manchester or in Liverpool, when they see something happening in Gaza, they feel connected. And that's a very, very powerful thing. So things are better, not perfect, but we're getting there, inshallah. Yes.
Just going off of what you said there, I think you made a really brilliant point about how it's important to recognise that justice for Palestine and standing for justice in Palestine is also standing for justice everywhere.
Absolutely.
And considering how Israeli militarization actually affects the rest of the world too. Israel are the 10th biggest global arms dealers, and what they do is they battle test their weapons and their technology in the occupied Palestinian territories, and then they go to sell them on to the brutal regimes in the world. So I think it's really important what you said there about understanding this in a global context and recognizing that justice everywhere.
No sane human being, no rational human being can stand by and see another human being denigrated, subjugated, humiliated, abused, and not moved to defend them. Anyone who simply sees that and then moves on and doesn't give it another thought, there's something wrong with them, and they need to address that. And what's happening in Palestine ought to move any sane human being, regardless of color, creed, or whatever. So yes, absolutely, it's justice everywhere. I mean, and it doesn't begin or end with Palestine. Palestine is one of the major chapters of human injustice, but it's not the only one. And we know that there is a litany, a catalogue of injustices committed by human beings around the world, and every single one of them is one that we must stand by the oppressed. There is no question. In this case, our stand is for Palestine, yes, but it's also for the oppressed over here in our country. Those who are oppressed around the world by the systems which claim to offer them so much glory and so much magnificence. It's the stand against injustice, and that's the stand that we choose to take today.